Welcome to Your Need to Know. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and tonight we're talking with Elijah Lee. He is the founder of a nonprofit called Hear Our Voices. And you might be surprised that this young man has accomplished so much in the area of advocating for an end to child abuse and to creating safe spaces in hospitals for pediatric victims of abuse. Elijah Lee is now 14 years old, but he actually started his journey to raise awareness about child abuse and to advocate for these comfortable, welcoming, safe spaces for children who are victims of child abuse in hospitals when he was 10. So, welcome, Elijah Lee. I think our audience members here in Northern Virginia are probably meeting you for the first time because you live in Richmond. And so, give us a little background on how someone who is 10 years old decides that he sees a problem, can make a change, and then sets about to do that thing.
Absolutely. So I want to first thank you just for this opportunity to be able to speak to you all. I think that my personal story starts, and with everything, just this fire that was lit under me. In the first grade, a friend of mine told me about their abuse. And as a first grader, you hadn't yet understood the problems that America continues to face and the society of America continues to face. At that point, I hadn't completely recognized child abuse. I hadn't recognized racism or gender discrimination or anything of that nature. I had thought that we live in a perfect democracy, a perfect society where everyone is singing in a circle, kumbaya. And while this is nice to believe, it is simply not the truth. It goes back to the idea that we must be able to get uncomfortable for true change to happen. And I hadn't yet gotten uncomfortable. And so once I did, that is something that just stuck with me, to know that someone I cared so much about, someone I went to class with every day, someone I saw every day, was going home and getting abused. It took me a moment to really recognize just the depth that I had. And once I did, it still just left this burden on my heart to know that I had to do something. I couldn't sit idly by and just let this happen. And so we got that person help, and they are now safe and healthy and thriving and living their best lives. However, I also understood that this person was not the first, nor would they be the last to be affected by abuse. And then you grow older and you learn of your history. And personally, this is where I got a lot of my power from, just because I believe there's so much strength in the people that have come before us. And I let them serve as examples and role models to how I wanted to make a change in our nation. So I looked to people like Marcus Garvey and Huey Newton and Bobby Seals. I looked to the Ida B. Wellses, the Angela Davises. I looked to the Gloria Steinems of our past, and I saw them. And I saw that by using their voices, right, something they were born with, they were able to make long-lasting change. Now, why they did not do it alone, I also understood that I wasn't in this alone. I understood that there are activists out there doing this work with me. And so I just wanted to be able to join a fight that was already in progress. And with that, I decided to lead my very first child abuse awareness march. And as a 10-year-old, I hadn't recognized the need for this, but I also had no way of assuming that it would have such a positive response from my community. And once I saw this, once I saw kids coming out, and once I saw these young people using their voices for things that mattered to them, I understood that this was something that I could not just give up. This was something that I could not just leave at one. And it just snowballed into there. So it snowballed into a second march, and it snowballed into a third and a fourth. And now it's snowballing to a fifth in my hometown, but also the first here in Chesterfield. And it snowballed into a pediatric safe room in North Carolina, but also one that we are currently partnering with Children's Hospital of Richmond to do here in Richmond. And so I think that when it comes down to myself as an activist, I think it took a lot of hard work, yes, but also at the very core of it, it is inspiring other young people to get involved. It is inspiring other young people to just make sure they understand the power that we have in our voices.
Well, one of your heroes I know is John Lewis, and there's a lovely picture of you standing in front of the Edmund Pettus Bridge. But when I hear you speak, I hear a lot of John Lewis, who also was a very young preacher. He was a very young preacher, and a lot of you hear that when he speaks, the how he was raised and how he learned his oratorical skills, and his faith mattered deeply. But here's the difference: most of the people you mentioned made a mark when they were adults, and here you are, you're 10, and you're organizing events, and so several things. What is the role your family played in supporting you? Number two, do you think you had an advantage in being a child, which was a novelty in organizing? And number three, what about social media and YouTube and social media platforms and the ability in 2021 or 2020 to be able to organize something in a way that the organizers that you mentioned never had? Those seem
Absolutely.
to me to be three things you have that they didn't have.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think that my family has been really the best thing that I could have ever asked for. They have been there every step of the way. My family and I, we've been through some hardships. I lost my father at the age of 3, and my mom raised 4 kids by herself as a single parent, and she still does that with my younger sister and I. And so I think that at that point, it's very easy to use a loss as a crutch, right? It's very easy to put these stereotypes and limitations on our young people because they've lost someone like a father, right? And there's statistics and stereotypes that even as a young man of color, I needed a Black male to be successful in my life. I needed someone to teach me these things. And honestly, we have been successful, right? There's no telling what would have happened if my father was here. However, I can say that my family, we really come together and become stronger over this. And I think with this, it only brought us together more. So that when I made the announcement that I wanted to become an activist, they were there every step of the way. They were there every single one of my marches. My brothers tried to make my speaking events. And even today, we have, my oldest is living in Austin, and my middle brother kind of thing, he's out in California. And even now, they try to make some of my virtual speaking events. And I do the same with their events and things of that nature. So I think that family is just the greatest thing that I could have ever asked for. That support system is something that I don't know where I would be without it. Regarding the social media question, I think absolutely we have an advantage. We live in an age where we have an entire community at our fingertips. And I think that this is something that is just truly beautiful in so many ways. And often we hear of the damages of social media. And it goes without saying that they exist, right? Social media can be a very negative place, one that can destroy mental health, one that can destroy your self-esteem, and much more. However, we also have an opportunity to use these things to our advantages. When I decided to create my first march, I went right to social media just so I can make sure that I'm advertising it. And that alone got me a couple of hundred people. And so I think that we could use social media to our advantage, right? So we have an event, or if you have a thought, if you have this theory about how you want to operate or go against a certain issue, social media is the perfect place, because not only can you share that and get that awareness out, but also it is a perfect place for networking. It's a place where you can meet other people like you. It's a place where you can meet media companies such as this one. It's a place where you can really get opportunities so you can become an activist and really spread that knowledge and spread that awareness for whatever issue.
Well, you point out something important. I've always said that social media is neutral, like a hammer or a pen. It's not inherently good or evil. It's simply a tool. So you use it for good, you can use it for evil, but the tool itself is neutral. And so you used it as an organizing tool. You found a community of people who cared about these issues, but it also gave you visibility, and that visibility gave you resources. So talk about the Marvel Hero program, how you ended up on Kelly Clarkson's TV show twice, because again, without them finding your work, without them finding you, you wouldn't have had the resources they have been able to provide in raising up the visibility of your work.
Absolutely. And so I think, again, this really goes back to social media, is that it started off because at one point I had made my social media post that I'm going to lead a march. And then with that came my local newspaper because they saw it. And with that came the local news channel because they saw it. And as we know, everything lives on the internet forever. And so one day what happened is that a producer, someone that we have now seen as family, was scrolling and they were trying to find a kid who was doing things surrounding child abuse. And they get to like the 14th page of a Google search. And there the channel was, and there was my interview. And that really went back to that single social media post though. And so we did it. It was a fantastic experience. And I was basically surprised at the end with a comic book, but also the opportunity to speak at the Lincoln Memorial in the steps of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., which was a great honor as someone that has always looked up to him and the work that he has done regarding just equality, not only amongst the races, but also against the economic class. And that, of course, with the Marble Hill Project led to many more opportunities from newspapers to Time Magazine to People's Magazine, which falls right into the first Kelly Clarkson experience. And with that came the second one. And so I think that it was overall just such a fun time for myself, just being able to navigate all these things. Similar to John Lewis, I am from a rural, like low-income community. So having these fun opportunities was really exciting. But also knowing that by using things like social media, but also saying, hey, here's a 14-year-old trying to make a change in the world, using that to your advantage, you really get people's names, you get people's attention. And so to any young person who thinks that they can't do it, we are young people. And with that, we are resilient. We are resourceful. And so we have to be able to use the fact that we are young to get people's attention, because people will listen once they see something that is unprecedented. People listen when they see something that they don't see every day. And so I think that's just a message to all young people out there who want to do something, is that we have an opportunity to, and that we absolutely can do it.
Yeah, and you're absolutely living proof of that, Elijah. And the fact that you are confident and you believe that you can, and by believing that you can, you have, which to me is a mental construct that young people, if they don't have a supportive network, are not necessarily raised or get that in the classroom or even in their homes. That if you think you can, there's a saying, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. So it really starts in believing in yourself and being around people who also believe in you. When we come back from this break, we are going to continue talking with Elijah Lee, the founder of Hear Our Voices.
Our fight against coronavirus isn't over. Let's wear face masks in public, stay 6 feet or more from others, follow state and local guidelines, and wash our hands frequently. Let's move forward together. Learn more at coronavirus.gov.
Caitlin, be serious. Now take the oath. Come on. I'm totally taking this seriously. Okay, I'm ready. You may begin. I pledge that I will never meet in person with anyone I first met online without checking with my parent or guardian. And furthermore, if my parent or guardian agrees to the meeting, it will be in a public place and my parent or guardian must come along. Do you pinky swear? I do.
When you teach your kids about internet safety, they'll pass it on.
You told me not to talk to strangers. You told me not to cross the street without looking both ways.
You told me not to touch the stove.
You told me not to do drugs.
You told me not to drink and drive.
You gave me so many messages about how to stay safe. Why didn't you keep me safe by properly storing your gun?
Freedom. It's at the core of who we are. The freedom to live without fear, to jog where we please, to wear a hoodie. The freedom to breathe. Before we celebrate the freedom most Americans have, we must fight for the freedom all Americans deserve. Because all lives can't matter until Black lives matter.
Welcome back to Your Need to Know. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and tonight we're talking with Elijah Lee. He is an activist, he is an advocate, and he is the founder of a nonprofit called Hear Our Voices. He started out his advocacy at the age of 10, working on raising awareness of child abuse and ending child abuse. And now he's actually taken his direct action into creating safe rooms in hospitals for the pediatric survivors of abuse. So Elijah, we are so thrilled to have you on this show and to introduce you to people here in Northern Virginia. When we went to our break, we were talking about some of the opportunities that you have had that were kind of created by social media and people finding you there. But there's actually multiple avenues of activism. There's not like one flavor or one way. So direct action is where you started, using social media to raise awareness for bringing resources together for building pediatric safe rooms is another. You now have an opportunity through a 2022 cohort through Virginia Voices for Children. I have interviewed them before on my show, but I'm not familiar with this particular opportunity. And I think it's so wonderful. I would love for you to tell us a little bit about what this is.
Of course. And so this is something that is also fairly new to us. I had also worked with Voices for Virginia's Children previously and become very close with Kristen Lennox there. She's great. Shout out to her. And she had actually let us know about this specific opportunity. And of course, as someone that wants to go into the field of legislation and also Congress, I wanted to just seize this opportunity. Because with my work with things of child abuse, but also in movements such as like the Black Lives Matter movement and gun prevention movement and things of that nature, we understand that at the very heart of all of that is creating legislation that is both empathetic, but also effective in making sure that everyone is represented, but also making sure that everyone is safe when it comes down to these things. And so, of course, the nerdy part of me that is just obsessed with legislation just came out. And so we applied and I got it. And I think this is just such a beautiful opportunity. And basically what's going to happen is that they gathered some youth together, including myself, and we're going to be able to go down to the Capitol for Virginia. And we're going to be able to talk with some of the legislators there. We're going to have a governor's roundtable with a couple of people and just really get that out there. Because I think that when we have our young people in places such as this one, we really get an opportunity to hear from them. We get an opportunity to hear what they believe in and hear what they want, because we know that our systems aren't perfect, especially when looking at our young people. We know that equitable education for all does not exist. We know that while Jim Crow has been removed, our schools are still very segregated based on poverty and economic class, based on what specific district you live in, whether we're talking about like redlining and things of that nature. So to have our young people come at the forefront and really speak to these people who are leading their districts, I think that this is just a great opportunity. It's something that I'm very excited for, not only for kind of self-love for these types of topics, but also because I think this will be a great opportunity for our districts to be heard on a completely new level. And that level is our young people.
I agree with you. And, you know, advocacy has to be people being given an opportunity to advocate for themselves. In other words, you know, I sat for many years on the board of Equality Virginia and advocating for LGBTQ protections against discrimination. But the fact of the matter is I'm not in that community. And so I see my role, and part of what this show does is create opportunities for people to advocate for themselves. And you bring up the issue of de facto segregation in our schools. And I think the Richmond Times-Dispatch did an incredible investigative report on the Maggie Walker Governor's School right there in the 8th Ward, in Jackson Ward. And the fact that the history goes back so far, and people didn't realize that there was not intentional discrimination in who got into the Maggie Walker Governor's School, but there was de facto discrimination in who ended up there. And this all came out earlier this year. And I was stunned, and I think a lot of people were. Tim Kaine's daughter went there, and he said, you know, he doesn't regret the fact that he advocated for a governor's school being put there, but he thinks it's very sad that young people of color were not the ones who ended up being selected to go there. So to my point, and I think this is what you're saying and why I want people to hear what you're saying, is that you can advocate for yourselves and young people can advocate for themselves, and that your voices do need to be heard. My role as an adult and the role of other adults is to create the opportunity for you to speak directly to policymakers, whether that's the school board or your delegate or your senator or the governor or your congressperson. And I think this is important for people to hear and see you. I love the name of your nonprofit, Hear Our Voices, because it is at the core of everything you're doing. So, what do you hope to do? So do you have an agenda of things you would like to address with the General Assembly when you get the opportunity to sit across from policymakers? What is at the top of your list?
So we are actually still very much in the planning of all that and just really trying to get down at the trainings. I really love how they're really doing this, is that they're creating different training opportunities for all of us as young people, so that we'll have different opportunities to really talk to these people. But also, how do we talk to these people? How do we communicate different types of policy changes? Because we're going into a place that sometimes it's unpopular. No one wants to talk about poverty and how it affects school systems. No one wants to talk about jobs and how women are still getting paid 84 cents to every dollar that a man makes. No one wants to talk about that, especially the men in Congress and the men in those House of Delegates. And so I think they're really going about this in a very positive way. But I think also it's just so many different things. So I think I really want to look at to what our administration is looking at doing. And I think that we also really want to go down to how we really need to start making Virginia a bipartisan place. I think so many things are politicized right now, and it's so easy to want to be split down the line. It's so easy to want to break up situations, that right now it is a time that we need to unite. Right now is a time that we as a state and as a place need to come together. So personally, I think we're going into this with the idea of what is the best way that we can unite Virginia as a whole? What are the best policies that we can institute when we need to unite Virginia, right? How do we do this, and what is the best way to go about this? And so personally, that's definitely going to be something on my mind, and not necessarily how do we put certain policies in place, but how do we create policies that create effective change?
So to me, what you also bring to this is a grasp of intersectionality. So when you talk about ending child abuse, for instance, why are children abused in the first place? Is it economic circumstances, poverty, families that don't have the right support or the right resources or their basic needs being met? There are a lot of things that contribute to domestic violence and violence against children. But what you're talking about with poverty and racism, lack of opportunity, even things like lack of public transportation and better schools, and all of these are contributing factors. But what you find in policy, a lot of time, things are broken out as if they exist in a vacuum separate from other things. When I hear you speak, I hear you telling me you understand that there's an intersectionality of many things that contribute to an issue that is trying to be resolved. I mean, I feel like as a young person, that is the greatest thing that you will bring to legislators when you sit down across from them, is your understanding of there is nothing that lives in a vacuum. There is nothing that can be resolved until you look at all the contributing factors that lead to that. And, and again, gun violence prevention, these are complex issues. They're not out there in a silo. And I do think policymaking tends to be very siloed. And what I hear from you is a tremendous grasp of intersectionality.
Yeah, and I think honestly, Martin King Jr. and also Fred Hampton, they really said it best in their really a couple of years before both of their deaths, and that we cannot continue to look at things like racism as a single issue, because it's not. We cannot continue to look at even like redlining and gender discrimination as a single issue, because it's not. Whether it goes back to poverty or whether it goes back to generational trauma, it all goes back to something. And I think when we're looking at something so complex as child abuse, there are just so many different things. And so if we're looking at things in situations often of neglect, it could be simply someone has to work so many jobs that everything is just all over the place. Or it could be, what we're talking like a richer family is that when we look at rich families, we say, oh, they have the perfect life. Those doors are perfect. everything goes on. So let me not check on behind those things. However, it is oftentimes those perfect families, the families that could do no wrong, that have some very dark secrets that our community refuses to look at. And so I think that, like you said best, is that we continue to look at everything in a silo. And that's our problem. Our problem is that we continue to see everything as an individual issue. However, it all goes back to something, whether that's poverty or whether that's things as simple as even hate in America, which is something is, no matter how much we hate to say it, but it's something that's still very, very prominent in both our systemic and also social constructs that we continue to live by.
Well, I think your grasp of these issues is amazing. I think the fact that you understand how to put it together in a way that people can understand what you're saying is really important. And I want to remind people you're 14. So this is not magic. You know, a lot of this you learned yourself. You've obviously read a lot. You've attended a lot of events. You're very plugged into current events. You know, this is something you did on your own, and people all have the opportunity to do that. I do want to mention here that with all this activism and everything you've accomplished in your life, you have not neglected your academics. You are a Jack Kent Cooke Scholar. You are a member of the National Junior Achievement Society. Obviously, your mom places a very high value on the fact that you need to continue to do well in school as well as doing good in the world. So tell us a little bit about how you managed to manage your schedule so that you were doing all these things well, Elijah.
Absolutely. And so I think that we had a very consistent rule in our house: just take care of your grades. And then after that, what your hobbies, like no one really like that doesn't really matter. My two oldest brothers are like star football like players, and my youngest sister loves to ride horses. However, we all have consistently great grades. And I think that the balance was initially really hard to be able to achieve. However, this was just something, they were both extremely important to me. However, I also understood that to maintain my activism, I had to maintain my grades. And there was such a passion in me for this that I just couldn't let it go. So there were nights where I had to work extremely hard to get it all done. But the point is that we got it done. And I think that that's just with everything that has a passion. And so everything may look a little hard at first. Things may look difficult at first. However, when we have this passion, when we have this fire, and this goes out to every single young person, when you have a passion and when you have a fire under you, anything is possible, whether that's maintaining good grades or becoming a star football player, whatever it is, anything is possible as long as you continue that fire in you.
And that is the greatest final thought I could have asked for from you, Elijah. Thank you so much for being on the show. I appreciate you. And for those of you at home, this is what you need to know about activism among young people and here in Virginia.